Alright, hello, and welcome to this video. Um, if you've watched, or I should say listened to any of my previous discussions, you'll have noticed that those two were about um, Japanese anime series. This discussion is going to be a little different, and here I'm going to be focusing on Heroes, an American drama series that debuted in 2006 on NBC, and it lasted for 4 seasons. Of course, if you're watching this, then you're probably already a fan of Heroes, excuse me, and or you're just interested in the show. Uh, my previous discussions that I've done before were all the more on the lines of thematic analyses, where I focused on themes, symbolism, things of that nature in regards to those series. Uh, this is going to be a little different. What I want to focus on with this discussion in regards to Heroes is what Heroes did right, what it did wrong, uh, the things it succeeded in doing, and the things it failed in doing. Essentially, a critical analysis. Heroes is kind of a controversial series. Um, it started off really well. It was popular, and then it experienced a very steep downward spiral, which it never fully recovered from. If you know about the the circumstance regarding its cancellation, Heroes was basically denied a proper ending. There was meant to be a fifth season, or at least some sort of TV movie to conclude the series that the series was never given, and it had a very turbulent ride. You know, we had some seasons that had highs and lows, more lows than highs, but it was generally an ambitious series, um, typically considered better than what was usually on at the time on television, but it was quickly overshadowed by other series that were similar to it, such as Lost. Uh, but regardless, what I want to focus on again is what Heroes did right and what it did wrong. Um, I won't be harping on Heroes. I won't be insulting it or bashing it or anything of that nature. I actually like the series, and this discussion is coming off me rewatching the latter half of Heroes. The latter half being second half of season 3 and all of season 4. So I'm not, reciting this complete from memory. I'm not giving a biased view of the series. My opinion of it has probably changed a little bit. I've been able to look at it in a more mature light than I did maybe 2 or 3 years ago when I was watching it on TV. That being said, um, I'm going to be pretty objective. I mean, there are things I like, there are things I don't like. There will be a lot of spoilers. That's the usual disclaimer, of course. So if you're interested in Heroes and haven't seen it or been exposed to it, I encourage you not to listen to this discussion. And that if you're interested, you should just go watch it. I'm not sure if it's on Netflix, but the DVDs are readily available. Uh, yeah, so that being said, I guess I'll go ahead and start. I was considering doing this by season, so we would start with season 1 and discuss the pros and cons of that season. The interesting thing about Heroes is that season 1 is, of course, the starting point. It's the beginning of the series, and it's also the best season um, that the series has to offer. Generally, it's considered to be universally considered to be the the only thing that's good about Heroes. I would disagree about that to an extent, but it's certainly the best season. Critical and commercial success. You know, a lot of people liked it. It was a big thing for NBC when it was coming out. It was also It was also pretty long and ambitious. Had a decent budget, big production values. It was just something that was really unique that happened on TV at the time. Uh, but that being said, as popular as Hero Season 1 was and still is, I should say, it had its flaws. Um, any of you who have seen season 1 know that it was pretty long. It was 23 episodes. So what that amounts to is essentially almost like 23 hours worth of television. And a lot of those episodes kind of piddled, they dawdled. Not a lot really happened. One of the things about Heroes is that I mentioned before it was very ambitious. There are a lot of characters, a lot of storylines. Tons of people around the world are suddenly manifesting superhuman powers, and they're having to deal with those powers and cope with them in a very realistic setting, you know, and trying to live their daily lives, trying to come to terms with personal problems while dealing with these abilities that they manifested. So in this sense, Heroes was a success. It was a high concept story that relied on a very grounded premise. That despite the fact that all these have superpowers, they're still living in the real world. They're still dealing with real world problems, and none of them are perfect. All the characters had some sort of dilemma. They had some sort of trouble, some sort of conflict they were trying to resolve, and the powers just made those things worse. So in that sense, Heroes succeeded, but its incredibly huge cast of characters was also one of its downfalls. Yes, even as far back as the first season, what usually would happen is that you get one episode, and that episode would be split into, say, I don't know. It would be split into like several scenes. Each of these scenes would be pretty short, maybe 2, 3, 5 minutes, and they would all be doing around like a certain character, a certain group of characters. So you'd get one episode that dealt with, say, for those of you who've seen it, Peter Petrelli, a Nathan, Hiro Nakamura, and Ando, and then you get another episode that dealt with the other cast of characters, Nikki, DL, Micah, whatever. The issue here with that type of format is that not a lot would happen. We would get this kind of very marginal progress in each storyline with every episode. It took forever for the series to get anywhere. So there was a lot of build-up. I think it took nine or so episodes until we got our first major shake-up, which was when Cyber was introduced and he went after Claire in Homecoming. I think that was the episode's name. And that was the first major shake-up. Of course, that's episode 9 out of 23. And then you would get the occasional climax, the occasional mini-climax. And then you would eventually end up at the season finale, you know. And the thing about Heroes, again, is because there was so much build-up, and people followed the show, and they dealt with it. They went with it, you know, even when it was kind of slow, kind of piddling. People watched it because they expected some sort of payoff. They expected a big payoff. Excuse me. And it wasn't. Well, I should say, because of that reason, the season finale was a big deal. Obviously, it was the promise payoff. You know, finally we're going to see what Heroes was all about. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be worth it. You know, worth the 22 episodes that built it up. Excuse me. The thing about Heroes' first season finale, though, was that it was kind of lackluster. We got this sort of weird final confrontation with the villain Sylar. Sort of not much happened. You know, I think what should have been the big, the central point of the episode takes place like in the last 5 minutes with Sylar. It's just kind of underwhelming. Definitely underwhelming. I think a lot of people went away with a very bitter aftertaste in their mouth following that. And Heroes Season 1 ends. So a lot of people argue that the season finale, Season 1, was the starting point of Heroes' downward spiral. I disagree, but I'll get to that in a bit. So if you look back at Season 1, it's a very ambitious series. Had a lot going for it, but it had some definite flaws in regards to its pacing and its plotting. Again, there were just too many characters, too many storylines, not enough time to ever really develop any of them that much. And then when you do, it takes so many episodes to get there. The climaxes that you do get are so fleeting and so few and far between that it's almost not worth it. And the drama just wasn't that strong. You know, again, you have too many characters. You're supposed to care about Nathan and Peter's relationship. You're supposed to care about Nikki and Micah, Hito, Sylar, you know. Well, actually, Sylar, you know, it was probably the saving grace of Season 1. Definitely, every time Sylar was on the scene, you expected something to happen, you know. And it may sound morbid, but every time Sylar killed one of his victims, took their ability, like, that was always probably the highlight of an episode. You know, that was always something like, yeah, finally something's happening, you know, some sort of action is happening. And yeah, so Heroes Season 1 suffered. It had its own flaws, even though it's typically considered to be the best the series had to offer. Which leads me into what I think is the major problem with the series. Everybody always talks about how Heroes experienced a downward spiral in terms of its quality, of a huge downturn. Some people think it's better. Some people think it's worse. And it's related to season one. Season one revolved around stopping the explosion in New York. Peter Siler was going to basically detonate like a nuke, go off and destroy New York, kill all the people living there, and that was the conflict that the cast of characters had to resolve by the end of the season. And they did so. They did resolve it. So, with that resolved, where did that leave season 2? And I think this is the problem with Heroes, is that as a series, Heroes never had an overarching story to resolve. There was never an overarching conflict. There were things alluded to in the season 1 finale. For when Sayori doesn't die, Hito is transported to feudal Japan. There's the Nightmare Man that Molly mentions that she's seen in her dreams. And all of these things you would consider would be brought up in season 2. But they don't really have much bearing on what happened in season 1. The explosion gets resolved. Big deal. That's it. This is kind of this is pretty different when you consider other story-driven series such as like Lost or Supernatural. I'll use those as those two best examples. Lost was a show that, despite its own problems, dealt with an overarching plot, which was the island, right? Dealt with how the characters tried to lead the island, dealt with how the characters interacted with other people on the island. Everything revolved on the island, basically trying to resolve the mystery of the island. So every season was tackling that. Supernatural had multiple seasons devoted to a single villain. That villain had a plan that would span multiple seasons, etc., etc., etc. Heroes lacked all of this. So we would get the same characters, but we wouldn't have conflicts that would last more than one season. So there was nothing ever to build a season off of. It always had to be a new conflict, a new villain, a new this or that. And that was probably the biggest problem with Heroes, is again, there's nothing compelling you to keep going. There's nothing new, or there is something new, but there's nothing that makes it flow. It's very difficult. It would be very difficult to achieve that in Heroes. So that's probably the major problem that I have with Heroes from the beginning, that there was just never a season-long plot, or a plot that spans multiple seasons. Which leads me to season 2. Season 2 is the shortest season of the 4. Not the worst, but it's interesting in that it's the one series that I think was the most organic. It did flow from season 1. We had Peter and Nathan's fade up in the air, no pun intended, and season 2 resolved that. Season 2 continued. It continued the story of Claire, continued the story of the characters. Everybody pretty much knows that Heroes was intended to have different casts of characters for each season, which would have worked, I guess. It would have remedied the problem a little bit, because each season would have been an isolated story with new characters, a new conflict. They would deal with it. But it didn't go down that route. It just retained the same cast of characters. So season 2 was okay in that regard, and it feels organic. So a lot of people criticize it, but that's the reason I like it, was because it felt organic. It flowed from season 1. It was like, alright, I can buy this. And they did a decent job of manufacturing a new plot. We have Adam Monroe and trying to unleash a virus that kills everybody. But this whole virus plotline has its own problems. And season 2 has the same sort of issues that season 1 had. It takes too long to get anywhere. What's worse is that season 2 is so short that it can't really accomplish anything. And everybody knows that season 2 suffered because of the writer's strike at the time. The Screenwriters Guild of America, I believe, they had their strike. So season 2 is essentially cut in half. It's supposed to be twice as long, have twice as many episodes. And the virus storyline was supposed to lead into something bigger. At the end of season 2, Peter Petrelli stops the virus. but the virus was actually supposed to be unleashed. It was supposed to, infect. There was supposed to be this whole quarantine business, and we were supposed to see heroes move on from there. So that pretty much put a hamper on season 2, and whatever plans that were in store for it. Now, this is kind of a crutch. Everybody sort of says, "Oh, writer's strike happened, therefore season 2 sucks." No, season 2 had problems that were definitely associated with the writer's strike, but also disassociated with it. The pacing sucked in the beginning. That wouldn't have changed. Again, we had some sort of weird decisions, like Nikki dying. Nikki dying was weird, and definitely one of the issues I'll bring up later. Characters like Monica, Caitlin, never heard from again, sort of disappear. But then we had some good things that season 2 provided. It provided Elle, provided Adam Monroe. We got a lot of mythology about the company. Learned a lot about that, and that was useful. That was cool. But one of the issues I'll bring up with season 2 is that it probably was the start of heroes becoming more comic booky as opposed to realistic. And by this I mean, if you look back at season 1, like I said before, there was this very grounded sense to season 1. That it was very realistic. That yes, people had powers, but that didn't mean that the setting or the context was abnormal or different or entirely unbelievable. No, it was the real world. And people they could fly, they could read minds, they could travel through time. Season 2 changes this. It starts to focus on the company. It starts to focus on a virus that could kill everybody. It starts to be a little kind of believable. The virus is not as compelling as an explosion. It's not a clever use of someone's abilities. It's like a plot device, like a comic book plot device. Oh, there's a virus, we gotta stop it. Okay. And then season 2 ends. Again, it ends with the virus being resolved, and then it ends with Nathan Petrelli about to out all the people with abilities. He's about to reveal himself on national news, and then he gets shot. And that's the end of season 2. That we're about to believe Nathan dies, or is going to die, and someone shot him, and we don't know why. That's where I'll start. That's where I'll stop this portion of the discussion. I'll continue in the next part when I go into season 3, which is kind of the big kahuna. Season 3 is the season that everybody kind of considers to be the downfall of heroes. And for good reason. Does some good, but most of it's bad. Again, people blame the writer's strike, but I don't know. You can't blame that for all heroes' problems. But yeah. So thank you for listening so far. Hopefully this hasn't been too erratic. That basically sums up season 1 and season 2. Yeah, so if you're interested, continue listening.